right, recording main determinants and their measurement. 5.3.1 Risk Behavior. Proposition 1. In firms whose risk-averse executives are paid in equity that they hold, we should observe more financial risk hedging and insurance purchases than in firms whose managers do not hold company equity. So proposition 1 is the executives, risk-averse executives who are paid in equity, who actually hold stocks of the firm, are more inclined to hedge or to have insurance purchases than in firms whose managers do not hold equity stock, do not hold shares directly. Okay, in the same risk behavior, proposition 2, firms whose managers are paid in stock options should hedge less against various risks to maintain high volatility of firm value and thus increase the value of their options. So we know that when you hold options are more affected by stock prices and volatility of the stock. So the more volatility you have, the greater is the value of your stock. So in this case, firms whose managers are paid in stock options should hedge less against various risks to maintain high volatility of firm value and thus increase the value of their options. Now, 5.32 maximization of firm value. Maximization of firm value. We will now look at arguments for maximization of firm value. We know that the four principal determinants are often cited in the literature to justify risk management activities are 4. Financial distress costs, risk premiums paid to partners, increasing investment opportunities or possibilities, and reducing expected tax payments. So remember, 4 principal determinants are often cited in the literature to justify risk management activities. 1 is reducing the expected loss, the expected costs of financial distress. 2, reducing the risk premiums payable to various partners and increasing investment possibilities, reducing expected tax payments. And we are going to see that these two are measured together by the variables that we use. Okay, reduction of anticipated costs of financial distress and premiums to partners. We say proposition 3 is that companies with high average production costs and that are more heavily indebted over the long term, should practice more risk management to reduce their anticipated costs of financial failure. Okay, so that's proposition 3. Companies with high average production costs and that are more heavily indebted, so that is long-term debt over market value, long-term debt divided by market value over the long term, should practice more risk management to reduce their anticipated costs of financial failure. Now, ratio of dividends announced and the use of preferred shares to finance investments. Okay, this is also a measure of financial distress, ratio of dividends announced, and the use of preferred shares to finance investments. The proposition 4 says firms in good financial health that announce dividends and finance their investments with preferred shares, which is a substitute for external financing, have a lesser need for external debt and consequently need less hedging or risk management to protect themselves from the costs of financial distress. So we have 4 measures of financial distress, which are the average production costs. Production cost is one measure, one variable. The other is long-term debt divided by market value. The fourth one is the announcement of dividends paid, and the fourth is the investment with preferred shares. Those are measures of cost of financial distress. In the increase in investment possibilities, remember that we have in the maximization of firm value, we have reducing the expected costs of financial distress, and this reducing risk premiums payable to various partners is more like if the costs of production that we see here, cost of production here, production costs require more risk premiums payable to various partners. Now let's go to the third, increasing investment possibilities. We say that proposition 5, firms with more investment projects should hedge more. Why? Because they invest in similar industries, so not really the diversification, but firms with more investment projects should hedge more. But this effect may be weak for firms having natural sources of diversification. So maybe if they invest, if they make acquisitions in negatively correlated industries. Now the fourth principal determinant, which corresponds to firm maximization of firm value, we have here firms with convex local taxation structures should undertake more risk management activities with convex local taxation, and we will see that the convexity is proposed by Graham and others. Like here we will see that we have more with convex local taxation, which is okay. Let's see, I'm going to look for that. Here we see proposition 6, reduction of tax payments. Tax save, we have one, tax save and deferred income taxes assets. The deferred income item of the statement divided by total assets. The deferred income item of the statement divided by total assets. Given that tax credits for losses reduce deferred income, the ratio measures the inverse of the tax function's convexity. We consequently predict a negative relationship in our computations with this variable. In our computations, this variable was selected because it was available on a quarterly basis, unlike the tax credits variable. All right. So let's go back to tax reduction of tax payments. So we have this. Firms with convex local taxation structures should undertake more risk management activities. And the way we measure this is with deferred tax measure. The most empirical studies show that large firms use more hedging, although it is the smaller ones that will need it the most. Okay, now for proposition 7, firm size. Related to firm size, firm size has an ambiguous effect on the level of risk management. Ambiguous effect. We are not certain how this behaves. But for proposition 7, we have what? We have firm size, we have reserves, we have two measures. The firm's proven and probable gold reserves in ounces at year end as a measure of firm size. So this variable is measured by the gold reserves. The variable is repeatedly for the 4 quarters for each year because it is available only on an annual basis. Similarly to the market value variable, reserves refers to theories related to the costs of financial distress and to hedging costs. The sign is undeterminate. It's not it's not known. It's not really predictable. Good. So now let's go back to our propositions and proposition 8, financial constraints. So we have two things in financial constraints. Firms with tight financial constraint have a greater need to hedge from price declines to be able to pay their debt and satisfy their other financial needs. We have liquidity ratio. We have also liquidity ratio and the leverage ratio to measure financial constraints. Leverage ratio, it's the long-term debt divided by market value, and this is a dummy variable that takes into account the liquidity ratio and the leverage ratio. If the leverage ratio is greater than the average and the liquidity ratio is lower than the average for the industry, it takes a dummy variable of 1, and that's the variable you use to measure proposition 8 of financial constraints. Proposition 9, we predict a negative sign for the variable liquidity ratio. So the more cash at hand the company has, this is like a natural, it's what we call natural hedge. Firms, it says here, firms with more liquidity need less financial hedging because keeping liquidity in their financial statements is a form of hedging. It's a natural hedge. Okay, so that concludes this video, and we are going to continue with the development of each of the variables.